Us. For the first time, we are hearing from the father of a mother of two who was shot and killed in a popular shopping center in the Pocket neighborhood. This as the family of Chastity Sparkman gathers for a candlelight vigil in honor of a daughter taken too soon. ABC 10's Roxanne Elias is live at the Lake Crest Village Shopping Center where Chastity was shot. Roxanne, such a tragic loss, and the family is still looking for justice.
On the night of February 14th, 2024, at approximately 11:15 p.m., Chastity Sparkman, a 26-year-old mother of two, was shot in the parking lot of the Lake Crest Village Shopping Center at Florin Road and Greenhaven Drive in the Pocket neighborhood of Sacramento, California. Sparkman was a devoted parent pursuing education at Sacramento City College and planning a future for her young son and daughter when her life was violently cut short in what authorities later classified as a homicide. Within weeks, investigators developed leads that pointed to a personal connection to the victim. Her estranged husband, 25-year-old Isaiah James, and his girlfriend Ayanna Burgos, both later arrested in New York City and extradited to face homicide charges. The case sent shockwaves to the local community, raising urgent questions about motive, domestic conflict, and missed warning signs the hours leading up to the shooting. Every case starts with evidence and works toward the truth. We rely on verified facts, documented timelines, and official records, not speculation or sensationalism. Subscribe to stay updated as we examine each case clearly, carefully, and professionally. In initial briefings, police stated the shooting appeared to be a targeted act rather than a random incident. Detectives immediately secured the crime scene, collected shell casings, canvassed nearby businesses for surveillance footage, and interviewed available witnesses. Authorities later confirmed that evidence gathered during the early stages of the investigation led them to identify Sparkman's estranged husband, Isaiah James, and his girlfriend, Ayanna Burgos, as suspects. Both individuals were located out of state and arrested in New York. Following arrest procedures, they were extradited to California to face homicide charges. Police emphasized several points during public communications. There was no ongoing threat to the public. Evidence suggested prior familiarity between the victim and suspects. The case involved digital tracking methods and interstate coordination with federal authorities. However, law enforcement declined to disclose certain specifics. They did not provide a minute-by-minute reconstruction of the suspect's movements before the shooting. They did not clarify whether the firearm had been recovered or when it was recovered. They also did not provide a detailed motive beyond referencing ongoing domestic conflict. This limited release of information left key components of the case undisclosed during the early stages, contributing to public speculation regarding planning, confrontation, and escalation. Before the shooting, Sparkman was described by family members as focused primarily on raising her two children and pursuing further education. She was enrolled in coursework and working toward long-term stability. At the time of her death, she was separated from her husband. Family accounts indicated there had been prior tension in the marriage. While specific incidents were not publicly detailed, relatives acknowledged ongoing strain in the relationship. Sparkman was reportedly attempting to establish independence following the separation. According to statements from those close to her, the relationship had experienced conflict. She was actively planning for her children's future. She had concerns about continued disputes with her estranged spouse. However, several important questions remain unanswered in public records. It is not confirmed whether she had formally reported threats to law enforcement. There is no public confirmation of restraining orders. It is unclear whether she anticipated a confrontation on the night of the shooting. The available information portrays a structured daily life centered on parenting and education. What remains unclear is whether the events of February 14th were sudden or the culmination of unresolved tension. Court records indicate that both Isaiah James and Ayanna Burgos entered not guilty pleas following their arrest and extradition. Through legal representation, the defense signaled intent to challenge the prosecution's assertion that the homicide was premeditated and coordinated. The defense's position focuses on several disputed points. Whether the meeting in the parking lot was planned in advance, whether either defendant directly carried out the shooting, whether digital evidence conclusively places both individuals at the precise location and time of the gunfire. Defense attorneys suggested that eyewitness identification was limited or inconsistent. They also indicated that digital location data, including cell tower pings, may not offer precise, real-time positioning capable of confirming exact physical presence at the scene. The defense narrative implies that the prosecution's theory relies heavily on circumstantial evidence. While acknowledging prior familiarity between the victim and one suspect, defense counsel questions whether motive alone establishes criminal action. This perspective conflicts directly with the prosecution's claim that the homicide was deliberate and coordinated between the two defendants. Witness accounts were collected shortly after shooting. Individuals in the vicinity reported hearing multiple gunshots. Several witnesses observed vehicles leaving the area quickly following the sound of gunfire. Some witnesses stated they observed what appeared to be a confrontation shortly before shots were fired. However, descriptions varied significantly. Contradictions among witness accounts include: some witnesses reported seeing one individual near Sparkman. Others believed two people were present. Vehicle descriptions differed in color and direction of departure. Such discrepancies are not uncommon in fast-moving nighttime incidents. However, they complicate precise reconstruction. Differences in perception, vantage point, lighting, and stress conditions can affect recall accuracy. These inconsistencies required investigators to rely more heavily on physical and digital evidence rather than eyewitness statements alone. Although full investigative files are not publicly available, the trajectory of the case suggests a focused and data-driven approach. Investigators prioritized surveillance footage from nearby businesses, traffic cameras covering adjacent intersections, cell phone tower data for relevant devices, call and text message logs between the victim and suspects. The investigative theory appears to have evolved in stages. Detectives may have first considered the possibility of a spontaneous argument that escalated into violence. Early witness references to a confrontation supported this line of inquiry. As digital evidence was analyzed, investigators likely explored whether the meeting had been arranged in advance. Phone communication patterns, location overlap, and timeline compression would have informed this stage. Authorities ultimately moved toward a theory of deliberate coordination. The involvement of two suspects and their subsequent departure from California became central to this interpretation. Case notes reportedly emphasized the suspects leaving the state shortly after the homicide, digital location data placing them in proximity to the shopping center, a narrow window between last recorded communication and the shooting. Interstate travel shortly after a homicide is often examined as potential consciousness of guilt. Investigators interpreted the departure as consistent with evasion. However, defense counsel argued that travel plans may have had alternative explanations unrelated to the incident. Another focal point was timeline compression. Detectives likely reconstructed minute intervals, last confirmed communication, arrival time at the parking lot, gunshot reports logged by dispatch, estimated departure time of suspect vehicles. Even minor differences in timestamp synchronization between devices and camera systems can impact interpretation. Investigators must account for possible clock discrepancies across digital platforms. Digital tracking methods probably included cell tower triangulation, geofence warrants, if utilized, review of app-based location services, data extracted from seized mobile devices after arrest. Forensic synchronization between video footage and phone data would have been essential. Surveillance cameras may not capture audio clearly, making timestamp correlation critical. Ballistic evidence, including shell casing analysis, would help determine whether a single firearm was used and whether multiple shooters were involved. Public records have not detailed these findings, but such testing is standard procedure. The investigation strength depends on convergence of independent evidence sources. Surveillance, digital data, forensic results, and travel records must align to establish a cohesive sequence. Defense attorneys will likely scrutinize precision limits of cell tower data, gaps in surveillance coverage, whether direct forensic evidence links either defendant to the weapon, the reliability of witness identification under nighttime conditions. Prosecutors, in contrast, will focus on pattern consistency, relationship conflict, coordinated movement, proximity at critical moments. departure after the incident, the divergence between interpretation and proof remains central to the case. In homicide investigations, forensic evidence forms a structural backbone of the case. In this matter, while complete laboratory reports were not publicly released in full detail, several categories of forensic analysis were central to the prosecution's theory and the defense's challenge. Investigators recovered shell casings from the parking lot scene. Each casing carries microscopic markings produced by the firearm's firing pin, breech face, and extractor. These markings function as a mechanical signature. Forensic examiners compare recovered casings against test-fired rounds from a suspected weapon to determine whether they were discharged from the same firearm. A key issue in this case was whether the firearm was ever recovered. If investigators located a weapon, ballistic comparison could provide a definitive match between that gun and the casings at the scene. If the weapon was not recovered, examiners would instead rely on class characteristics such as caliber, manufacturer markings, and firing patterns. Without the firearm itself, linkage becomes probabilistic rather than absolute. Another factor involves the number of shots fired. The distribution of casings across the parking lot allows reconstruction specialists to determine shooter position and movement. If casings cluster in a tight area, it suggests a stationary shooter. If they scatter in a pattern, it may indicate movement during discharge. Minor differences in casing ejection direction can alter interpretations. A stationary ambush scenario differs significantly from a face-to-face confrontation in motion. Trajectory analysis assesses the angle and path of the bullets. Investigators measure entry wounds, bullet fragment, and impact points in surrounding surfaces, such as pavement or nearby structures. By projecting rods or lasers along the bullet path, forensic teams approximate shooter height, distance, and orientation relative to the victim. If the trajectory indicates a downward angle, it may suggest the shooter was elevated or taller. A horizontal path could imply close-range engagement at equal height. Powder residue testing may determine whether the shot was fired at close range. The presence or absence of stippling, soot, or gunpowder particles can narrow the estimated distance between shooter and victim. Trajectory evidence is often decisive when eyewitness accounts conflict. If witnesses report a face-to-face argument but trajectory suggests shots fired from behind, those discrepancies alter investigative conclusions. The autopsy establishes the official cause and manner of death. In this case, the cause would have been identified as gunshot wounds, with homicide as the manner. Beyond that baseline determination, the autopsy provides granular data, entry and exit wound identification, bullet path through internal organs, time of death approximation, presence of defensive injuries, toxicology screening results. Time of death estimates rely on body temperature, lividity, and rigor mortis progression. These biological indicators are cross-referenced with emergency response timestamps. If the medical estimate differs from dispatch logs by even minutes, investigative timelines must adjust accordingly. Modern homicide cases frequently hinge on digital alignment. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses provides visual timestamps. Meanwhile, cell phone metadata records tower connections, GPS pings, and message timestamps. Investigators overlay these digital records to create a synchronized timeline, time of last known communication, device location relative to cell towers, vehicle movement captured on camera, gunfire detection timestamps, if available. However, synchronization requires accounting for clock drift. Surveillance systems may not be calibrated to atomic time standards. A difference of 2 to 4 minutes between devices is common. When reconstructing a minute-by-minute sequence, these variances matter. Even small timing discrepancies can shift interpretations from spontaneous escalation to coordinated arrival. Several forensic uncertainties remain critical. Was the firearm recovered? Without recovery, the prosecution relies heavily on circumstantial and digital linkage rather than direct ballistic matching. Were fingerprints or DNA definitively linked? The presence of biological evidence on shell casings or related items could strengthen direct involvement claims. Absence of such evidence leaves room for defense argument. Did forensic timing precisely match eyewitness accounts? If surveillance footage shows suspects arriving minutes earlier than witness recollection suggests, memory reliability becomes an issue. Each forensic category either reinforces or destabilizes competing narratives. Public reporting framed the case in concise, simplified terms. Headlines described a targeted domestic-related homicide occurring on Valentine's Day. The narrative emphasized a relationship breakdown and the timing of the event. This framing serves public clarity but does not reflect the technical layers required for criminal conviction. Media summaries often refer to cell phone records as if they provide exact positioning. In reality, cell tower data identifies general sectors, not precise coordinates. GPS accuracy depends on device settings and environmental interference. Passive data collection may create time gaps. The difference between a phone connecting to a tower sector and a device being physically at the crime scene can be legally significant. Public discourse frequently equates motive and association with coordinated action. In court, conspiracy requires proof of agreement and participation. Digital overlap alone does not automatically prove coordination. Prosecutors must demonstrate communication suggesting planning, actions taken in furtherance of the plan, intent to commit the underlying crime. Media accounts may imply coordination without presenting evidentiary nuance. Witness recollections often differ regarding number of individuals present, vehicle color or type, sequence of shots, direction of departure. Media outlets summarize without dissecting inconsistencies. In a courtroom, those discrepancies are scrutinized extensively. Thus, the public narrative prioritizes coherence, while courtroom proceedings prioritize precision. During court proceedings, the prosecution and defense constructed opposing interpretations of the same 72-hour window. The prosecution's case centered on coordinated planning, alleged communication prior to the meeting, digital location overlap, phone data placing both defendants near the scene, relationship motive, ongoing marital conflict, rapid departure from California, interstate travel interpreted as consciousness of guilt. Prosecutors likely presented visual timeline boards aligning text calls, surveillance stills, and dispatch logs. By compressing events into a continuous sequence, they aim to show deliberate action rather than impulsive escalation. The defense countered by focusing on evidentiary gaps. Cell tower precision, arguing that sector coverage spans broad areas. Witness reliability, highlighting contradictory descriptions. Forensic absence, emphasizing lack of confirmed fingerprints or direct trigger evidence. Travel explanation, offering alternative reasons for interstate movement. The defense's objective was to introduce reasonable doubt rather than construct an alternative perpetrator narrative. Key tension points likely included minor timestamp inconsistencies between devices, surveillance blind spots where no camera captured the critical seconds, lack of publicly confirmed confession or admission, interpretation of text messages as ambiguous rather than incriminating. Both sides reconstructed the same minutes differently. One presented a structured plan. The other described coincidental presence and circumstantial layering. At the time of reporting, both defendants faced homicide-related charges. Proceedings had advanced through arraignment and pretrial phases. No final adjudication or sentencing outcome had been publicly confirmed. The ultimate resolution depends on jury assessment of digital reconstruction reliability, weight assigned to ballistic and trajectory findings, credibility assigned to eyewitness testimony, interpretation of motive within evidentiary standards. The burden of proof remains on the prosecution to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecution maintains the act was intentional. Evidence indicates coordination. Digital data confirms proximity. Interstate travel reflects evasion. Their position treats the digital and physical evidence as cumulative reinforcement. The defense argues evidence is circumstantial. Cell data lacks granular precision. No direct forensic proof ties each defendant to firing the weapon. Motive alone cannot establish action. Their strategy emphasizes absence rather than contradiction. Several questions remain central to public understanding. What was the exact minute-by-minute sequence before the shots? Who physically discharged the firearm? Did the encounter escalate during an argument or occur as a prepositioned ambush? What communications occurred within the final 24 hours? The answers to these questions determine whether the event is classified as impulsive confrontation or structured coordination. This case illustrates how modern homicide prosecutions rely on the integration of traditional forensic science and digital reconstruction. Ballistic evidence provides physical context. Trajectory analysis clarifies positioning. Autopsy findings anchor biological fact. Surveillance and phone metadata attempt to fill temporal gaps. Yet each category contains inherent margins of error. When layered together, they create a narrative. When examined individually, they reveal uncertainty ranges. The courtroom functions as the environment where those margins are debated. The prosecution synthesizes data into intent. The defense isolates variables to introduce doubt. The final determination depends not on narrative coherence, but on evidentiary sufficiency. Facts verified. Case concluded. Justice is determined by what can be proven. Subscribe for more documented cases and real criminal investigations.